Hi everyone, welcome to our meetup today. I'm Tiffany. I'm one of the co-organizers for the Design Sprint meetup group here in Silicon Valley, but we've also opened this up to San Francisco and New York. So if you're from one of those meetup chapters, welcome. We're really happy to have you. So today we're going to be going through the topic of kind of expanding your design sprint skill set and tool set. We have two wonderful speakers, Deb Aoki and Laurence Macsween from Adobe Design, which I also work, and they're going to be here talking mostly about taking us through visual storytelling as well as how to use a design sprint approach to leadership. Just to give you a kind of a heads up for all the newcomers, an intro to our design sprint community. We're mostly here as practitioners, facilitators, anyone who's interested in learning more about the design sprint process. And we really started this group to get people who are interested in learning from one another and to build new skills and meet other people in the community. So we're really glad to have all the people that we have joining today. In terms of the tools we're going to be using today, we are going to be using Zoom, obviously, we're already on it, as well as Mural. Just so you know, we are going to have a more moderated session for Q&A. Taylor, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, he's going to be taking questions from the chat, and we're going to stop throughout the different talks to make sure that your questions are answered. We're going to go ahead and hop into the next part of our meetup, which is the talk by Deb Aoki.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name's Deb Aoki. I work at Adobe as an experience designer. I've been here at Adobe for about 1.5 years now. Before that, I worked at eBay, worked at PayPal. I did some work with Sony, and I've also taught simple sketching for sprints and for UX. I'm also a cartoonist, so that's kind of where my background in that comes from. One thing I thought that was really interesting when I read the sprint book and went through the process, it talks a lot about drawing. At the same time, what happens is that people will go into a sprint and a lot of them will say, well, I can't draw. So sometimes I've had situations where sprint participants, when you ask them to do crazy 8s or the 3-part sketch, sometimes I get 3 6x8 Post-its that are just wall-to-wall words. And that's a problem, you know, because sometimes I've seen it where it'd be a great idea, but at that point, it's so hard to parse and so hard to understand that the idea gets lost. So one of the things I wanted to try to explain and try to share with you here is that drawing has a role in design sprints, and I think you need to put some thought into incorporating it into design sprints. One of the reasons why you do drawing is it gives you mice powers. It makes your content more memorable. It helps people, you know, process the information a lot faster. You know, it helps them understand what's much faster or see the big picture, so to speak. It helps with communication. I think people can get on the same page as having the combination of words and pictures can make things much more clear, and people can kind of see like the end-to-end process much more clearly. Also, it helps us drive empathy. So it's one thing to put a quote of a customer saying being frustrated. It's quite another thing when you put a quote and you put a upset face. It really drives home that feeling that of the customer. One of the things that I want to point out is that there are times when you can draw in the sprint, and it's not just during the sprint. Sometimes doing it before the sprint can be very helpful. One thing I do is I do a lot of drawing before the sprint. I do a lot of prep, for example. Sometimes what I'll do is I will draw journey maps and then create and then prep that and then use as an opportunity for participants to put Post-its like, yes, I agree. Yes, I want to add something to that. Know that, yeah, this is very urgent. And this allows people to see an end-to-end process and then comment on it. And other things I'll do too is sometimes I'll make a big poster of design principles, things that we want to solve or things that we want to strive to achieve during the sprint. Sometimes I'll put up a persona if we're creating for a certain audience. Sometimes I'll do things like post customer quotes, for example. In other cases, some of the prep involves creating a scenario where we're trying to solve a problem. So I'll pre-draw what the scenario is, and then it's just there as a large poster that people can read and react to. Another thing that I'll do sometimes before a sprint is I'll try to incorporate some drawing instruction. And I'll get to that a little bit later so you can try that as well. Now during the sprint, it's helpful to have a certain amount of sketching skill as a facilitator and as a participant. For example, during the lightning demos, when people are talking about a favorite service that they want to bring as inspiration, I'll be there with a pen and I'll be drawing as people are describing the service or product that inspires them. Like this, for example, was someone was talking about what they liked about Spotify. And in this case, we were talking about customer service. So one of the participants talked about how she really likes the doorside service that she gets in India. There's a laundry service. The person comes to her door and knows how to iron her jeans and comes to her and gives the vegetable person gives a personalized service and makes them feel special. So these are all things I drew live while this was being shared. And it stayed up as a poster in the room, and so it became an object that helped people be inspired and be able to refer to while they were working on their crazy eights and their sketches and so on. I think sometimes what happens is that a lot of times with design sprints, we rely maybe on PowerPoint decks and stuff like that. And we'll show something and it'll be only for a few seconds and then it's gone. But by drawing it and leaving it in the room, you're leaving that inspiration in the room. For example, this was for a design sprint we did at PayPal where we showed a video of a person who was a small business person and a self-employed artist. And she posted a video on YouTube about how angry she was about PayPal suspending her account because she sold her prints online and then she got some publicity and then she sold a whole bunch. And then it just triggered something in PayPal that created a lot of problems for her. So, it's one thing, of course, people in the sprint took notes while we were watching the video, but they would refer to this poster over and over again. It's like, wow, how can we fix what the mini went through? Another thing that being able to draw that's very helpful for your participants is particularly during the sketching part, when you're doing like the 3-part sketch and the crazy eights and so on. As I mentioned, sometimes people will do this stage and just write, or they'll just make interfaces. And I find that, just even teaching simple sketching gives people an opportunity to present their ideas in a way that's both easy to digest and is appealing. So this example here is the chatbot is one I drew. And this one here, the one in pink, is one that a student from a class I was teaching at Stanford did. She did a storyboard about people who have pets that travel. And then after the sprint, you can also use your drawing. At the end, when we do the I like, I wish, what ifs, or the aha moments, I will be there capturing things with pen, with drawing and writing. And it's kind of nice because then people see that in real time I'm capturing what they're saying, and then it becomes part of the record of what happened in the sprint. Drawing can also be used like when you're sharing readouts from your sprint. For example, this was a sprint that we did for trying to transform the new hire experience at Citrix. We did interviews and we looked at where the key pain points were, and the yellows are the insights that we came up with were opportunities for change. So this was something that we were able to use and share with various stakeholders across the company. So now let's get to the part where you are going to actually draw. So what I want you to do is if you have a piece of paper in front of you, like a sketchbook or a Post-it pad, make sure you get a Sharpie pen, something big and thick and readable, because what you're going to be doing is we're going to be drawing along and then we're going to be posting drawings into the mural. So everyone has a piece of paper in front of them or Post-its in front of them? Yay. You can use an iPad if you'd like to. All right. So you really don't have to draw a whole lot of stuff. there's some real basic things that you will use over and over again when you're using drawing for sprints. So one of the main things that you will learn how to draw is how to draw faces. So one thing I want you to do is draw a couple circles. And then in the top row of circles, make a bunch of dots. So these would be the eyes. So roughly about a little bit above halfway point. There are three things that change the emotion of a face. One is mouth. So everyone, of course, knows that if you do it like this, it's a happy face. And this, it's a sad face. But you can also do things like yelling, confused. The other thing that will change it will be eyebrows. So say, for example, you draw 4 happy faces. And then what happens is that as soon as you add eyebrows to it, if they're pointed down, they look devious. They pointed up, they look apologetic. They're like this, they're skeptical. So you see how from one happy face, you've made several. The other thing that will change a face is the eyes. So with eyes, for example, you can do things like, if you do like someone rolling their eyes, you can do like these commas. Or someone is surprised, you can do it like these, like that. You can also do it like this and they're sleeping. Or like turn it the opposite way, it's like they're happy. The neat thing too is that for any of these combinations, you can mix and match. And you'll create even more faces. Now the other thing, that after I teach how to draw faces, and these you can use just by itself, for example. You can do it with like, say, a quote like, oh my God, like that. Or you can use these as headers or draw attention to people's reacting to things. The second thing that I teach after that is how to draw people. Now, most people will draw stick figures. What I usually like to try to do is, I do another way where I'll draw a circle, and I'll draw a rectangle, and that's the head and the body. Now, then I put the torso. Then, to draw the legs, I'll put 2 lines like this, line like that. Now, the thing that's neat about being able to use this kind of rectangle body is that I can do things like, if I wanted to make it a woman, I just make it come out like that, down, da, 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 da. For example, and it becomes a dress. Or I can do things like put a W and a dot and a line, and I have a guy with a necktie. The other thing that I like too about being able to do this is that I can do things like, if you tilt it, the rectangle, you can make it like somebody is running. Or you can do it like they can be holding onto a phone. Or they can do things like, I don't know. Or no thank you. You can also do things like, say, for example, you're talking about someone who is skinny, someone who is fat, someone who is pregnant, just by changing the rectangle. changing the body. So once you kind of have like these basic people, then you can do stuff like, you can combine it with learning how to draw, adding more to your vocabulary. So one thing that comes up a lot in sprints is how to draw innovation or ideas. The stereotypical way to do that is to use a light bulb. So to create a light bulb, it's just you create a balloon, and then I do a zigzag, and then I do like a Y, and then I add that to show that it's lit. Or if the idea is no good, then I can exit out, for example. You'll find that there are certain things that you'll just draw over and over again that are just really common. For example, like an email is just a rectangle and a V. And then you're sending the email and you can put an arrow like it's being sent from a laptop. Drawing a laptop is basically like, you know, rectangle and another rectangle, and I'll put like a little dot there. And then that's somebody using it. A phone is basically like that, and then a couple of squares for the apps. Or just like even like just a rectangle. Sometimes there's things like when you're dealing sales situations, I'll just draw a rectangle, some lines, and a pen, and that's a contract. Sometimes I'm dealing with AI, so I'll just make a simple robot. Clouds, and sometimes it's like I'm dealing with a server, I'll just draw more rectangles and shelves for the servers. Money, just draw like a rectangle, put some lines underneath it. Security, I'll just draw like a square, a dot, and a triangle. And then you put two loops for a lock. Then if I want to draw time, maybe I can draw like a clock. If it's going to take a lot of time, I'll put more clocks. Or I'll say this will take a month to do. So I'll just draw a rectangle with a line over it, grid. And then maybe to show that there's a deadline, I'll put a red circle. If I want to show more months, then I'll just put another couple lines in back of it. So these are some of the most commonly used symbols. I mean, this will of course vary depending on your industry, but it's kind of good to learn how to draw the symbols that are common in your situation. Another thing that's good to know is word balloons. So for example, the typical word balloon is just a circle, you leave it open, and then you put the tail leading to the mouth. And that says, I'm saying something. And then if I'm yelling, then it's a jaggedy one, like, or if I'm thinking something, then it's a couple dots leading up to a cloud. I think I would like to eat some tacos. Sometimes if I'm showing mechanical or AI computer speech, then I'll use a square word balloon instead. So that's some basic parts about that. Now then what you can do is you can take these simple symbols and you can use them to create storyboards. So there's a couple of tips like that things will read from left to right. You can combine things. Sometimes I'll use color to draw attention to pain points. I'll use save red for pain points, green for success. Also, sometimes what I'll do is I will draw the context of the person using the device. Like I'll show them using the phone, and then I'll draw the screen in back of them. And what that does is that implies that what the person is looking at in the phone is being seen. So this is a way that you can show a combination of screenshot or interactions and showing the context and how someone is using it. So just as a quick note, I'm using Wacom tablet and I'm drawing directly on the screen using Photoshop, but there's a number of different ways you can do it, and I'll get back into that in a little bit. But what I'll do is I'll take what I've just drawn and post it into the mural board. But I want to encourage you to post what you've drawn on the mural board. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing and go back to the mural board. All right. So go ahead and post your drawings wherever you would like. I'm going to post the demo drawing in here as well. And while we're doing that, was there any requests, any questions?
Actually, I thought it was really useful. I didn't realize how hard it was to draw such a simple thing, but it makes such a difference having the eyebrows looking down. It just makes what you're saying more believable. It gives a story to your words. And I'm really bad at drawing, but I just drew something cool, you know, and it's details that make it the difference. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. Anyone else? Anything that was tricky or interesting, or any requests?
Deb, back to the concept of having the poster in the room for people to reference. I really like that idea. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for doing that while everyone is remote.
So I think the mural board's really helpful in that you can create these things ahead of time. The other thing too is that you can, I think I'm still trying to figure out how to make this work in terms of, like, I put up a template that people can draw on using like the pencil part of mural, and being able to draw on there. I think it's helpful to start out by giving people examples too. So for example, during the part where you're talking about the 3-part sketch, I think it's really helpful to show people examples of different 3-part sketches that other people have done, because then they kind of get a sense of like, you know, that's what's expected here, or that's what I could do, rather than just say, oh, just do a 3-part sketch. You know what I mean? Did that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
I had one question actually. You mentioned that you will be speaking about this, but I was really interested in knowing the different ways in which you can draw digitally.
Okay. So there's a couple of different ways you can use different tools to draw digitally. There's a bunch of iPad drawing apps, I think, that are really helpful. Or tablet drawing apps you can use for Surface tablets as well. There's Fresco. Fresco is kind of nice because you can not only use draw in pixel, but you can also draw in vector. And vector is really nice because that's really good for when you have to make drawings that have to be scalable to be printed out large. Today I'm using Photoshop because that's what I'm most comfortable using. I'm using a Wacom tablet, Wacom Cintiq tablet, and it's basically a tablet where you can draw directly on screen. It acts as a second screen, so you can, when you're doing like a video conference, you can just share that screen. Another option is, if you prefer drawing on paper, there's IPEVO document camera or any kind of document camera. And what this allows you to do is to share what you are drawing on a paper through a digital camera, and it scans it. And it also allows you to take a photo of what you're sharing. The nice thing about this particular model is that it is wired. It can also work as a wired or a wireless connection. So I've seen it used in workshops where people, you know, we have a mix of remote and in-person participants. And so you can walk that camera around to the in-person people, and you can share what people are drawing or doing. The only downside I would tell you about the IPEVO camera, it's not that expensive. It's about maybe $200. The downside with it is that with all the remote teaching that's going on, it's become an item that's in quite high demand. So you might find it a little hard to get right now, but it is possible to get. There's also Mural Scan, which is a way for you to use, it's in beta now, but you can also use it as a way to use your phone to scan what's drawn on a whiteboard or on a Post-it note and immediately import it into Mural. There's also the Post-it note app, which does something similar, but for Post-it notes. The other thing I wanted to point out as a resource is, this is the IFVP. It's the professional organization of people who do graphic recording, sketchnoting, meeting facilitation that uses visuals. If you're interested in this type of thing, I'd recommend giving it a try, checking them out, because they're a really interesting organization. And a lot of people are talking a lot about the challenges of doing digital facilitation with drawing. All right. Any question?
Nothing from the chat.
Okay, very good. So I think that's it for now. Why don't I just hand it over to Lo then?
Hi, I'm Laurence Macsween, and I am also in Adobe Design. It's kind of where we're showing strong today. I am on the design strategy team, and I run a small team called 5 Peak. And our goal is to help designers across the org implement kind of broader strategy. So we're taking this hang in a different direction here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use design sprint methodology in aligning leadership. And I'm probably going to, refer to executives or to leadership here. Really, that's just a placeholder for stakeholder in any other context. So this should have transferability if you're an independent designer and you've got clients, if you are a student and you're building your network and you want to kind of make sure you can show different parts of strategy in your work, or if you work in a similarly big enterprise like Adobe. So I'm going to talk at you guys unfortunately, for just about 15 minutes to get level set here on the methodology that we use. Then I'm going to take us into a little mini activity and carve out some time for Q&A. So like I mentioned, I'm on the design strategy team, and our role really is bring a little bit more business rigor to the design conversation and vice versa, be that kind of translator piece that can go out and help spread the word about why design is so important as a problem-solving methodology. So we tend to kind of play in these two spaces. And my small team called 5 Peak was intended to help build a scalable methodology that other people could use to bring strategy into the work. So that's what I'm here to show you today. And we did a ton of research on how to embed customer centricity and how to do better strategy within design. And what we found is the classic double diamond that everyone I'm sure here is familiar with. Everyone was really compelling within Adobe, but one thing that a company our size tends to struggle with is sort of silos and lack of alignment. So stakeholders not having the same view before moving forward on something. So we had to actively carve out these other 3 diamonds of like go, no go moments of alignment. So we could make sure that we didn't invest in something if people were not aligned on a specific problem we're solving for. So we do that stump speech all over the company. And, when you add all these diamonds together and you climb all the peaks, you have 5 of them. So in the corniest, delightful way, that's where 5 Peak comes from. Okay, so I'm sure everyone here sort of recognizes most of this. People love bringing design strategy and design thinking to the work if they've taken a workshop or found a toolkit that resonates, or they've been introduced to this and they want to find a way in, but it can be really, really hard to inculcate all of those parts of a toolkit into your day-to-day job. So frameworks that have heavy templates or lots of rules about who you should have, those tend to kind of, they have a very high start rate. And then we interviewed people across the company. It was just so hard to sustain. So when we built our framework, we wanted to make sure that it could be as lightweight as possible. And there was value if you had an hour to do it, and if you had 3 months to do it. And so it just is a little bit flexible. So the 5-peak model that we use, it's a set of questions that tend to go overlooked when we're doing design strategy work. And, they're overlooked for time reasons, for resource reasons, for just not knowing what the right process is to answer that question. And our job is to try to help get these questions as kind of like you should feel guilty if you don't have answers for them. But mostly it's meant to be agnostic. So this can apply to big strategies at a Fortune 500 company like Adobe, or I've used the same process that I carved out here for my friend's nonprofit and how she can better design her services. So it really multi-varied applicability here. I'm going to tell you some Adobe case studies because that's what we're here for, but hopefully you can see yourself a little bit in the model. So there are the regular design strategy and design thinking methodology. That's the 2 diamonds that we break up. And you'll see here the legs, we call these legs, the ones in green there, associated with the discover and define phase. I'll go through these in a little bit more detail later, but we have a similar, slightly smaller set on the part of the design process that's about solutioning over here. So this one is about sort of classic problem identification. Are we solving the right problem? And this is designing the right solution to that problem. And again, you can see those little alignment diamonds in there that we make sure to kind of have as gatekeeping mechanisms before we go forward. Okay, so here are a couple samples. There's some redacted pieces in here, so you'll see some unfortunate black squares, but should give you a little taste. So everyone talks about stakeholder synthesis, like that's, classic way to start a project and get an idea of who the important people are in the ecosystem of your project. We do that at a sort of Iron Man level. We are looking at not only the decision makers and the fancy people kind of at the top, but who are the people lateral? Who are the people that have tried this before? Who are the people on the front line, maybe talking to users or customers in customer support, and really getting like a holistic view of stakeholders? And what that does is it gives us an opportunity to answer the question of how do stakeholders define the challenge or opportunity with a really broad view. And what you have here in terms of images is screens from a deck that we did. The chart on the right is an interesting case study. This was a project we did to help our customer support organization improve the experience of our 1-800 number. So like super sexy, compelling project. And so we talked to 12 people on that project. So not even a really big set. And we got listed here 24 KPIs. So 24 ways that we were going to be evaluated for success on this project. And this project is a 6-week project. So slightly unrealistic. So the great thing about this kind of stakeholder synthesis is with that, I was able to go back to the VP and say, which one of these is the most important to you? So when you think about your own work, when you talk and do really meaningful stakeholder synthesis and you're asking the wide group of people, what does success look like? And you're getting 12 different answers, that's a really good place to take a beat and say, okay, maybe I need to go talk to my client about that. Maybe I need to refine what matters to me. So stakeholder synthesis can be a little hand wavy and people dismiss it, but it actually is such a foundational piece to making sure you're set up for success. The next question, and I won't go through all of these because we've got too many of them, but just a little sample. Classic benchmarking and competitive analysis, always a great way to know what's going on in the space. And we tend to do this for a lot of projects and teams that just don't have the time. It's really, they're in the work, they're doing all the great design work, and they just haven't had time to really sit and spend 3 hours going through the competitor product and looking at what else is out there. When we do benchmarking, we don't just look at like the direct competitor. We get inspiration from retail or from a museum, or kind of what other experiences are analogous to the type of experience that we're designing, and what can we include here to broaden the view of competitive landscape. And here's where we start to get into kind of that thing I mentioned about our role being about bringing the business into design and design into the business. We carve out this leg and we answer this question within the design org, because it's really important for us to be able to speak the language of the business. Oftentimes we hear design doesn't have the right seat at the table. It's given decisions that have already been made by product or by an executive. And us getting a little bit more familiar as to where the largest opportunity for a problem comes from means we can have a more literate conversation about like why the user need matters or these other things that everyone in this group cares about. But so we tend to kind of go broad, talk to, again, lots of different people with a view of the business, which is generally a little rare for the design org to go out and do that. And then we come back and are able to shape that. The other ones I'm sure everyone here is familiar with. So role actor study, that's classic sort of segmentation. Who are you solving for and how do they split up meaningfully? So if you're doing different journey maps or you're doing, you know, different ways of researching the customer, here's probably where you start to talk about who. Next up, you've got customer discovery. So again, classic one, I'm sure here, very familiar with talking to customers and plotting their pain and what they're struggling with and what to improve. The next one might be a little bit unique to some. So if you think of customer discovery as evaluating the experience and the sentiment of a user and what they're feeling or struggling with, we also complement that with value and anti-value mapping, which we definitely need to come up with a sexier term for. But it's basically a journey map that doesn't take in sentiment, that only looks at the exchange of value. So where is there friction? Like, what are we giving to a user? And what are we asking of them? And is it equal, or is it maybe more on the benefit of the customer or the user side? And sometimes we use that to compare, like that little graph on the upper right. Sometimes we're comparing against other companies, and sometimes we're just plotting our own. And this really helps us see a unique view of the journey and where we might run into trouble. The last one that has an example here is, what is contributing to the poor user experience that has nothing to do with the stuff that we, the stuff that we can solve? So, design has so many options and such great problem solving, but if two executives or two stakeholders do not agree on what the goal is, it's going to be very hard for us to shape a meaningful solution. So what other factors are contributing to user pain that have nothing to do with design or even engineering sometimes? So what you see here, we did this enormous journey map for one of our products. We brought in customers and it was really successful to kind of illustrate that there was a lot of pain in this journey. What we also discovered is that there was some really interesting challenges behind the scenes around incentive structures for the people in sales, or these other kind of really unique things that really weren't about design. So we helped kind of highlight those and move it forward. Futures and foresight is something I'm is getting a lot of traction, and people are pivoting to that work. And that's really about, if you're designing for the next 2 years, build up the muscle to think about what it's going to be like in 5 to 10, not because we can predict that. It's mostly just another vantage point to look at the problem. All of these legs are different ways to look at the problem. So working to answer these questions is what helps us kind of go back to an executive with like the case for change that has all the answers we want. The last one that I'll talk about on the other side of the other diamond is oftentimes when we're presenting pitch decks or we're presenting a new solution, we start with the impact it could have, kind of classic startup pitch deck style. Here's all the money we're going to make, and here's all the retention, it's going to be amazing. But we don't always do the last one, which is the idea of calculating what happens, the opportunity cost. What if we don't do it? Or what if we only do half of it? Or what if it doesn't actually happen this year and next year? And really having that conversation, because then you eradicate decision debt. You start to get into the mode of not just selling the what could be, but like the reality behind that. All right, so this is a bit more pitchy than I normally go for, but generally going through this methodology, we help people identify the right problem before they start to solve for it, which is, I'm sure, classic for everyone here. This set of questions helps to narrow the scope, provide a little bit more efficiency of who we're solving for. We get a clear case for change, and generally it helps prevent pivots after things have gone to market, a lot more like classic prototyping, getting it in front of users early, all of that good jazz. We tend to hear on the side, the lasting impact is more trust and influence, because if you're best able to describe the problem, you're usually best you're usually the best person to solve the problem. We tend to hear from people that have used this that they feel very confident in what they're proposing because they can be asked by many different people, why is this the right problem to solve for? And they've got a really solid answer. This is some of the work that we do with teams at Adobe Design, and I'm going to focus on the one in darker blue, which is the strategy sprint. So now we'll get a little bit more into how this ties to sprint work. So much like a design sprint, where you've got a limited amount of time and you're obviously coming together, we just wanted to provide a similar approach to doing strategy, which is so hard for people to carve out time for, especially when you've got like a 3-month quarter to report to, and you just got something from a client or you just got something from an executive to do in 2 weeks. And so it's really hard to carve out that longer term piece around strategy. So we needed to build something that could do it in 3 days. So we've got some non-negotiables around that. It's focused on the green diamond. So we really try to focus on the problem space because we don't want to move forward into solutioning before we've really had that alignment moment. We make sure that the team that we're working together is facilitating with us, because then they learn all the nuances of this type of work rather than just facilitate for them and have them be participants. Each participant that joins becomes an expert in one of those questions. So they come in and they've done all the research. They've had a first pass at the point of view of what the future in this space might be. Tend to keep it around 12 people and 3 days. That obviously was pre-COVID. Now it stretches over 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and trying to make that stretch into a week. We've got one coming up that's 7, but again, only 4 hours a day. So the first day, we're defining the problem. So each one of those experts comes in, they present an answer and a hypothesis to the question in that leg. There's a lot of negotiations where they are trying to get the whole group to align on the right answer to that question. So if that's benchmarking or competitors or what the future is going to be like, that's where we hack it out. By the end of that day, what we're looking for is what decisions do we need decision makers to make. So if we need more resources, if we need them to, approve a new way forward, a new vision, any real kind of decision can be implicated here. The next day is all about building that case. So if you are trying to propose a new way forward, a new vision for a product, a new design, then we're coming together here where we're building that deck and we're telling a really great story, much like any other pitch deck. The next day in the morning, that's our kind of like alignment power, not a power hour, power 4 hours, I guess, where we have already staged either individual meetings or a group session with decision makers for the first half of the day. And the team comes in and presents the answers to their questions and they make the case for what they're looking for. We facilitate for alignment. We give them an opportunity for the decision makers to test the answers. And, like any good kind of facilitated moment, you're looking for some good quality banter, but you're also helping to shape whether or not we're getting to this answer that we need and the decisions we identified the day before. But we don't move forward if there's no alignment. As an example, if you have 2 executives or 2 partners in a client team or anyone that don't agree on what the problem is and how we want to move forward to solve it, like best not to start solving it. We can save a lot of challenges if we just focus on alignment before we start solving. So that's kind of a really high level overview of how we power through all of those questions in 3 days using a lot of the similar facilitation methodologies that Design Sprint recommends. So I'm going to take us into the mini activity. Bear with me. What I'd like to do is I went through that really quickly and we didn't cover all of the questions in detail. So you've got the first diamond here and you've got all the questions we use to identify, are we solving the right problem? So there are about 50 dots per color, and you'll see the question you're intended to answer here. So have a go and read through the questions. And what I'm looking for is popularity of answer. So what we're going to look at is what is the most overlooked question that your teams, your manager, your contexts often overlooks and is left unanswered in early stage of your work. Then we're looking for what I call the biggest alignment offender. So what of these questions reveals the greatest misalignment between your stakeholders. And the last one is the one that you long for. This is the one that you wish your teams just repeatedly, like what do we wish we just did constantly all the time better? So grab a dot and you can drag it into whatever question you've identified as the right place to go. So pink stays in the first one, orange, so you basically get 3 dots.
1 dot each, Lo.
That's right. Thanks, Jeremy. Awesome. Looks like just anonymous seahorse and anonymous rabbit. Give you guys another minute. Awesome. All right, I'm gonna start jumping in. Okay, Okay, so benchmark landscape for the lose, not really driving force here for decision making. It looks like, so I'm going to just talk through and kind of, we'll get to some questions because usually this is a good time after people have asked this to kind of reflect on what goes wrong in their worlds and carve out some therapy time for that. But what we have in the first one, this spread is natural every time that I do this activity, that depending on, your team and your space, these ring true differently. What I'll say is, at least for the overlooked one, we find that it doesn't seem for benchmark landscape, but we often find when people come to us, they want to use a menu. They want to pick like one of these two, maybe a combo. They don't need all the other answers, particularly foresight. That last one there, not worried about 5 and 10 years. They're just worried about tomorrow. So what I usually bring up here is this sort of serves to illustrate that generally there's value in answering all of these. And you certainly don't have to answer them all in the same way and dedicate the same amount of time to them. But the advice that I have for anyone answering these questions is, even if you spend like 45 minutes just having a hypothesis about what the future might look like, or just quickly going and visiting your competitors' sites and seeing how they engage people, it's certainly better than nothing. And all of these different perspectives on the problem really add to a holistic view that you can then speak to in any of your work. So while there is often a single overlooked question, the spread of these would indicate that there's definitely value in answering quite a lot of them. So classic, biggest alignment offender, obviously stakeholder synthesis, but I love the smattering in the other stuff because, again, that's organizational dependent. And what I will say is that if you get that first one right, and you've done stakeholder synthesis well, what usually happens is you've not only kind of gotten all the information about what success looks like, how people define the risks or what they see as barriers about what the project is. You've got all those juicy first questions. You've also built relationships. You've also given this project huge project awareness. So even if stakeholder synthesis feels like quite a heavy lift at the beginning when you just want to hit the ground running, it's 30-minute meeting with a good healthy set of your stakeholders is really going to set you up for awesome relationships down the pipeline for your project. You can come back to them. Obviously this depends on the organization or on the company, but most people, when they have an opportunity to talk about their view of the project or the problem space, and also most people just want to talk about the barriers. So if you can include that in your stakeholder synthesis, you usually get an ally because they just want to tell you everything about why this is not going to work and why. And once they get that off their chest, they sort of are a little bit more disarmed. We found that that can be a really valuable tool. We go back to our stakeholders with the whole collective set. So this is not just for us that we do this. We come back and we present the aggregate view of everything our stakeholders said, obviously anonymized, but then we show where there's misalignment. We make them kind of face that kind of music and just say, you guys are not aligned here. Here's where that discrepancy is. So it's almost not on you. You can take that off of your shoulders and say, we're trying to do our best here, but there's some clear things we need to work on to get aligned. So I really encourage you to invest in that in every project, even if that's something outside of work. Just a really good way to build cred and trust with your partners as well. Not a surprise here that everyone wants to do customer discovery. That makes a lot of sense given the group that we're hanging out with tonight. This is a challenge for everyone. There's usually not enough time, not enough budget, and getting customers is really hard, particularly if you're not in a consumer-facing space. We're trying to build out more avenues to do lightweight customer research here. So one of the ways that we can expedite that, or we found is really successful to get buy-in, is to talk about the cost of not doing this research and really have that conversation with stakeholders. What is we need 4 weeks for this research, and we get a lot of pushback, and it's going to cost this much money, and it's really hard to make the case, and you don't have a researcher, or and so what we are able to do in that moment is say, okay, well, we've kind of calculated what might look like if we don't talk to people, what the risks are of not talking to people. And that's kind of what this looks like over here. We'll effectively be shipping our prototype. We will not have the same level of confidence, and we are concerned of getting these 3 things wrong. But really having that ROI conversation has been really helpful for us. The second most popular, and that guy looks to be org factors, which I chatted about before. This is a tricky one because it helps, at least in our case, we're a neutral practice team, so we don't kind of hold the stigma that maybe a team on the project would have to, telling other people what they're doing wrong. So, but I would say that we have been able to just carve out time to present this as project risks or as team risks. And instead of calling them org factors, we just make it much more about risks. We've had lack of incentives for people to do things, executives not being aligned, clients not making time to solve it. Things like that can come up here, and it's really awesome to be able to have that elephant sorted out before we start solving for the problem. So just a little general overview of these hotspots that we're seeing, but hopefully taking a full view of these questions sparks some ideas for you guys about maybe some questions you could be asking in your own work to have a little bit more robustness in the work that you're doing. I'm going to stop and make sure we have time for questions on this material. Any questions?
So if you could go back to, I think just this one that you were on previously, it's this question around foresight in futures. And it's kind of interesting because I think what you touched on when you were giving your overview was that usually, you know, stakeholders are interested in looking at what's available in the immediate, maybe 2 years down the road. And then there's this, what you had said is that it's hard to predict a future of 5 to 10 years. Is there anything that you employ or have seen employed around how to not only involve design in that kind of visioning as an exercise? What are the techniques there?
Yeah, I'm really passionate about this area. And there's many, if you look up futures and futures workflows and templates and stuff, there's a lot of juicy material there. But my kind of go-to is just to get people quickly into this, because you can have elaborate setups of experiences set in the future where a customer has to, phone customer support 10 years out. What are the conversations they're having? Magazines from the future is a classic one where people have to build that. I tend to like looking at designing or having people think through things not to do with the product. So really level setting. I do two things. I make sure to cover what didn't exist 5 and 10 years ago, just to kind of freak people out about like how different the world is, because I think we forget that. So, just even Instagram was not a power player when, just things like that. We need to really remind ourselves how quickly that stuff changes. So I level set with that. And then I ask them to look into the future and think about, based on the product, if it's in retail or if it's in tech or automotive, like really just explore different scenarios about what the future of automotive is before I go anywhere near our product that's related to that. We're working on one right now about the future of the experience when someone graduates. They've used Adobe products in their school and now they're out in the world, and what happens then. So instead of looking at specifically that moment about how the product is used, I'm trying to get them to think about what graduating is going to be like in 5 to 10 years. How will that be different? And how will the creative industry be different in 5 to 10 years? What name job titles? Will we all be working remotely? That kind of stuff.
Awesome. Thank you.
We also have a question in the chat from Jill. With internal org factors causing misalignment, how have you seen that solved well and quickly in the past?
Great question. Well and quickly. I feel like that's sort of pick one. I think this is usually generally a conversation that, to get it expedited fast, we tend to have that conversation with the most senior person in the room and just say, listen, this is bubbling up, particularly when we had 2 people that were meant to solve a big problem together, like a global product problem together, and their 2020 plans did not have the same stuff on them. So how are they motivated to do that work? That is a difficult conversation to have. Another way we've done that is we've been able to build kind of an anonymized survey of all the different org factors, and then just have people that are related to this project rank them. So a bit like when, a company will have like a forum about questions to ask the senior people, a lot of people's voices to come up and bring that problem to light. We send it back out to everyone and we say, what are the biggest risks here? This is what we've collected. Which ones do you think are more important? So then the conversation almost neutralizes the conversation, so that the focus is then on which one is most important, not should we be having this conversation at all.
Thank you. And then Seth asks, for people working in smaller product teams, how might you adapt this?
Well, I guess smaller, sort of not in a big company. I'm assuming that's because we've got kind of tiny teams that use this within Adobe as well. So When I've shared this with my friends who are perhaps on a smaller startup or in a smaller company, the way that this tends to get manifested is mostly just in design crits. It becomes a little bit of a baseline for people to just expect that they're going to be asked these questions. It kind of embeds itself more in the culture than in the process.
So Jason asks, how do you quantify the cost and impact of a solution?
Cost and impact of a solution. Currently, we are really focused on building out a org-wide metric for ROI of design. The way that this is pointing and the way that we're hoping to shift is time to quality, because we are not always responsible for all the decisions that implicate a product success or a solution success, right? We, particularly in design, we can measure the impact our entire org, which is about 400 people, has on the whole company. So that we can do, and then we can, 2 steps down from that, look at the impact of the design activity had on a project. But project success and the success of a whole solution shipped to market, it's touched at least 10 different orgs to get there. And so it kind of falls out of design's hands a little bit. So we want to talk about our role, and we tend to look at time to quality. How quickly were we able to get to a solution that best met the user need and delivered on what they were looking for?
This is an interesting question about kind of stakeholder buy-in. Justin asks, for teams that don't currently use these types of strategies, do you have any methods for selling this to teams or leadership?
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's a hard sell to say we're going to go through this big elaborate process and do a lot of templates. I have encouraged people to begin to integrate it into their work, much like a design sprint. You know, selling someone on a 5-day or 2-week version that they've never done before is a hard sell. So just sort of inviting people to work a little bit differently, perhaps in a smaller session or workshop. I have found that people have the most success just in answering these questions and providing those answers when they weren't asked at all, you know, just coming to the table with these answers rather than making it a big ask to follow a new process. I know that's not sort of a tangible answer to that question. I have people are allergic to process, right? So there's not really an easy way in. The other thing is you kind of have to do this work, much like other, you know, sprint methodologies. You have to actually do it before you see the value. You know, this right now, if you've never gone through it, kind of looks like labor intensive, lots of things to do, big research. But honestly, you could just have a go at answering these questions in 90 minutes, see what you know already, and then focus on the things you don't know a lot about. And that's still a benefit. I would be covert with it until people are like, whoa, you know everything about the problem space. I would say just integrate it as best you can, but selling it generally doesn't fly.
Yeah, so almost like inspiring trust in the process through small demonstration of it, however you can, whether it's a conversation, whether it's let's just do this little thing and see how much value we get out of that, and then building on that.
That was infinitely more articulate. Yep, that was perfect.
No, just paraphrasing what I heard.
Yeah, influence, yeah.
Definitely. Nathan asks, is this framework best used as a facilitation guide where stakeholders and product teams answer the questions, do the work, or as a project guide where a project team does the work on behalf of other teams?
Question, Nathan, like that one. I use it for both. We are sometimes tasked with being the strategists and answering these questions on behalf of our stakeholder client. And sometimes we are guiding teams through it. I think it depends on the project or team, but it's meant to be flexible to apply to both. If you obviously have facilitators in the room, I have done one leg myself. I've done benchmarking, and then I facilitated customer discovery and then gone back to doing value, anti-value. So it really depends on the project.
Excellent. And I think Brianna kind of brings us to the holy grail here. How do you measure design activity ROI?
That is a whole other workshop. And
you have 10 seconds.
Go. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really elaborate process. I think one of the best sources you can read right now is the McKinsey report on this. That'll give you kind of the industry standard. We're still developing this ourselves, but calculating the ROI of design is not new, but it's sort of emerging within the last 2 years. And I think McKinsey and IBM and Envision have all taken a leadership stand at how to do that.
Yeah, I think that report is called The Business Impact of Design.
It is, yeah.
I think. The last question is, now that we're all working from home, how have you conducted sessions? Is it all on Mural? Do you use other online tools? Is there more pre-work, et cetera? What pain points do you have?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got kind of my go-to list for facilitating at home. We are limited to 2-hour sessions in person. We don't make people stay on a call for longer than or any kind of thing where they're together for 2 hours. We tend to make the breakout sessions at a different time. So we had a 3-day leadership offsite in New York. It was going to be wonderful, full of restaurants, and then we had to go and take it online, and less exciting, but we did 2 hours every morning, and that was where we did share-outs and discussions, and then sharing out the homework, I should say. And then in the afternoon, we had assignments for them to then go and build, which they then shared the next day, and we did that for 5 days. So we broke it up into 2-hour chunks. Everyone had their own Zoom room that was separate, so we didn't have to manage breakout teams in one chat. The other thing I'll say, 3 other tips. We had a single source of truth for this kind of stuff. So, we use wikis at Adobe, which is people have opinions on, and that's the place where everyone, that's where all the resources were, all the assignments, all the uploads, all the shares. That really helps people feel like they know what's going on, the agenda. So then if we needed to change anything, it was in there. So have a single source of truth. For assignments, the way we managed that was, when we do it in person, it's so great. Obviously, you put it all up, everyone sees everything. We don't have that luxury. So we did 2 things. We made sure there was a space for collaborating on the assignment. We happened to use a Dropbox paper doc because it didn't require a lot of whiteboarding and moving things around. So that was where the breakout teams did their work. But then we made sure to carve out a refinement moment. So they actually had to take their work and turn it into a deck to present. And that's often an overlooked step with this kind of stuff, because it's so tempting to just share the collaborative workplace that you've just been in. But that refinement moment is where you really start to break down the answers that you're looking for and get really you tighten up kind of your thinking on it. So I would always split your assignments up, if you're doing it remotely, into 2 parts, the collaboration work and then the refinement work. And it's the refined work that they share out the next day.
Yeah, I love that, kind of balancing the time between all being in something together, contributing, all of that, with individual work. Thank you for all those awesome answers. That was
cool. That was fun. Yeah. Well, we're back to Tiffany, right?
Thank you guys, Deb and Lo, both of you presenting this awesome material. We will wrap up. Thank you again, everyone, for attending.